There's this myth that Aristotle was lost to the Roman Empire and then sort of mysteriously rediscovered at some point just in time for the rise of the medieval university. But in fact, the story is a lot more complicated than that. He didn't just sort of show up suddenly in a medieval monastery where someone said, oh, look, this dusty tome, and what's this? And started reading it. Aristotle comes to medieval scholasticism through Islamic philosophy. And so in order to understand the story behind this, we have to know that the lands into which Islam spread after Muhammad are lands in which there's a rich philosophical tradition and many flourishing philosophical schools. And these schools are reading Aristotle. They're Neoplatonic schools that are reading Plato. And these thinkers from these schools translate these Greek texts into Syriac, and then eventually they get translated into Arabic. And there then develops these flourishing schools of philosophical thought, people who are reading Aristotle and Plato together. For instance, in 9th century Baghdad, where Christians and Jewish and Muslim philosophers are all together reading these texts and trying to work out how to integrate them with monotheistic concerns. There are many misconceptions that we have, perhaps because of our readings and familiarity of history of the Crusades and awareness of present conflicts, that give us the impression that the history between Christians and Muslims in the Middle Ages is simply one of political conflict. But this is certainly a misconception, and a great example of how these sort of misconceptions develop and then are reinforced is found in a painting called The Triumph of St. Thomas Aquinas by Benozzo Gozzoli, painted in the 1470s. And it shows Thomas Aquinas seated with his feet on Averroes, crushing Averroes. It's this sort of iconography similar to the Virgin Mary crushing the head of Satan. So he's his triumph over Islamic philosophy. And this picture has sort of reinforced this narrative that Islamic philosophy is simply a foil or considered a kind of danger to the inquiry of Christian philosophy in the 13th century. And the reality, I think, could not be more different. In fact, when Aquinas begins to read Aristotle, this new sort of these newly discovered texts, he's not just sort of reading them in a void. He's picking up an entire tradition of Aristotelian interpretation that's been flourishing through the Middle East and in Muslim Spain for centuries. And so we really have to realize, I think, that there would be no Thomas Aquinas without Muslim thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes and Jewish thinkers like Maimonides.